How do we get the economy moving again? And how do we support that from a testing perspective? How do we get kids back to school? And the scope of the testing that we can provide and support is much, much bigger. But we can support that because resources aren't as finite.
What if faster and earlier detection of disease was possible? What would this mean for us in the world? According to the American Cancer Society, if you're diagnosed with breast, melanoma, or prostate cancer early, survival rates are 99%. But if you're diagnosed late, survival rates fall to 20 to 30%. Early diagnosis is critical. A future of earlier diagnosis exists. When caught and addressed early, diseases, cancers, and all the risk factors that lead to them can be identified and stopped. One company is on a mission to build that future so you and your loved ones can take back agency over your own health. Today, I sit down with Peter Foley, the founder and CEO of LetsGetChecked, a leading health insights company that grants consumers direct access to testing options and clinical services from home. They're helping make early diagnosis possible at scale. In today's interview, Peter shares how his personal experience facing an unexpected diagnosis put everything into his life into perspective. It also illuminated problems in our current healthcare system, obstacles that his current company is now solving. Peter shares with us how this inspired the founding of LetsGetChecked. He also talks about the evolution of the company and how they're currently tackling the COVID crisis head-on. We also dive into company building, where Peter shares some of the struggles he faced early on and how he's scaling and building the company today. Taking care of you starts with you. And on this episode of Hidden in Plain Sight, Peter shares how with the right tools, that's becoming easier than ever. Enjoy today's episode of Hidden in Plain Sight with Peter Foley. Let's jump in.
This season of Hidden in Plain Sight is brought to you exclusively by our friends at Splunk, the Data to Everything platform. Splunk helps organizations worldwide turn data into doing. It's time for data to be more than a record of what happened. It's time to make things happen. Learn more at Splunk.com or by clicking the link in our show notes.
Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you're calling in from Dublin, Ireland, and you're the founder of LetsGetChecked. I'd love to hear about the start of your story. You got started in Ireland. Walk us back there. Tell us what the origins were like.
Started the company about 5 years ago now. And even back then, I suppose the idea was always the same. Allow people or consumers to access diagnostics in the home. I suppose the reason for it is growing up. I think, everyone's had people in their family who've probably died too young. Detecting late stage prostate cancer or colon cancer or someone keeling over from a heart attack probably before they should. And a lot of these things are totally avoidable, but it's just too difficult to get testing and get the information that you need to change habits or lifestyles to kind of help yourself live that bit longer. So I think that's always been the driver for me. This type of testing and screening should just be part of your day-to-day life. You shouldn't have to think about it. It should just be part of what you do, and you do it in the home. When there's an issue, someone helps you. So we built our whole business model and thesis around that. Of one hand, enabling the testing and someone does it themselves in the home without thinking about it. And then providing those results directly into the patient's mobile application or the consumer's mobile application, but providing support if they need it. So if there's nothing wrong, there's nothing to talk about. We'll still talk to you, but if there's nothing to talk about, it should be fine. But if there is a problem, we'll help out. And there's different levels of what help might look like. But that's the kind of driver of where we started and why we started. And it's really just grown from there.
Sure. And you brought up a number of important points there. The one I wanted to zero in on is, the number of challenges, diseases, disorders, maladies that people go through that are treatable if they're only detected earlier. So is there any data you like to cite, or are there any statistics about how many of these challenges are treatable if detected earlier?
One standout, and it's pretty much across the board. If you catch stage 1 bowel cancer, you survive. Simple as that. If you catch stage 4 bowel cancer, you're not surviving, or probably won't survive. So without getting into the statistical nuances, like just at a very high level, it's literally life and death. And you can apply that across the board, whether it's cancers or severe chronic disease states. It's a pretty simple rule to apply. You catch it early and you're okay. You can maintain it and manage it. But the one that I suppose it would stand out for me is, bowel cancer. It's just so avoidable, so treatable, and unfortunately, people catch it late in the day.
Right. And this whole mentality of going to the doctors and, looking elsewhere for help, it kind of takes us away from the reality that we all have agency over our own health. And we can, thanks to telemedicine, thanks to Let's Get Checked and other services, we can just take it in our own hands to get checked. So when you were starting the company, was this a kind of different idea? Did people cringe at it? Did they think it was weird that you would get tested on your own? Or did you find a lot of support early on where people just said, oh, this is obvious, like I'm going to get tested?
There was also the side of it of, like I would have played a ton of sport, and the idea of optimizing your health as well is just a huge element of this too. Like there's many different users of our system, whether it's somebody who's tracking from an athletic standpoint and optimizing their health, or someone with a chronic disease state, or someone who just needs to screen regularly because of a family history. But when we started out and you're bootstrapping it and you don't have a ton of cash to do what you want to do, you have to be turbo focused. And in the early days, we had to I started it off as a sexual health testing service, because you build a platform and then you need to establish the hypothesis of, will someone actually test in the home at all? Because you can have the greatest idea in the world and you think it's brilliant and everyone thinks it's brilliant, but you bring it to market and then just nobody uses it. So you need to
Right.
You need to maybe go down roads that you wouldn't necessarily want to go to, I suppose, prove things out. And we started off because of that, of being turbo focused. What do we think people will definitely do in the home because they don't want to go to a doctor's office? And we picked a topic that has a ton of stigma around it, and where people really don't want to go to the doctor's office is typically around STDs. So we started there, and it worked. But what that gave us was something to point to, something to demonstrate that the service, even from an operational standpoint, was effective. And it gave us then that platform to start diversifying in terms of what we do and what we offer. But for us, even in the early days to mid days, we were regarded as an STD testing company. And it took a long time, I suppose, of branching out, providing different services to shake that or be recognized for doing more than that. But yeah, I think to go back to your original question, we got a lot of support. And I think one of the questions, when we started off, particularly in the VC community, is doctors will hate this. Doctors won't want you doing testing or letting patients test or consumers test. And it was quite the opposite. You're giving people the information they need, and then when they go to a physician's office or a doctor's office, they've actually got the information on hand for a physician to make a decision. So we've one of, I suppose, the surprising elements is the level of support that we've got within the medical community, because of the benefits that it drives, and because I suppose primarily around the aftercare piece of, we've got nurse practitioners and we've got physicians on our own platform that can tie in with that person's PCP and provide additional context around the result as well. So, but no, to answer your question, we got nothing but support, because ultimately what we're doing is a good thing, and it's a good reason to get out of bed every day.
Completely agree with that. And you mentioned something interesting about getting started in that area around STDs and sexual health. When you got started there, it's obviously an arduous process convincing other people that you can branch out, that you're, way more than just this. What was that process like? Because I know it can get exhausting when you're continually telling a story or telling a news story about where the company's going, how it's branching out. How did you kind of get over those hurdles and recreate the brand as this entire full health and wellness company?
I think we were operationally set up for it pretty early on, and I think it was just a matter of time. So we started in Ireland, and Ireland's still an amazing and important part of our story. But it allowed us in a smaller market to test things out. So rather than offering it to the whole of the United States, we were able to do test things in a smaller market, and that allowed us to test a lot of these things, particularly around the STD testing profile of the business. But by the time we launched into the US and we set up our manufacturing, and we developed out our lab element and our big partnerships. And the business was a bit more mature at that stage. So we were able to launch kind of from the get-go a much more diversified product offering and range, and additional services around what we do, like e-prescribing. E-prescribing is a core part of our service so that we can treat people at the end off the back of a diagnostic. So I think what it enabled us to, and I hope I'm answering your question here, but by starting in a slightly smaller market and being able to test out, some of your theories and develop out the process flows and operational requirements in a smaller market, it allowed us to launch into the US with a much more diversified offering from the beginning. So maybe that labeling of being an STD testing business alone wasn't quite there, because when we launched in the US, we were a little bit more mature than what we would have been when we first launched in Ireland.
Right. And I think I'd love to drill down a little bit on your own personal story, right? Because you went through something that was really challenging when you were around 16, and that type of personal experience, obviously has shaped the culture of the company and your mission. If you don't mind, I'd love to hear more about your story. And it sounds incredibly frustrating, but also like it sparked a lot of the company ideas.
Yeah, sure. I think it kind of goes back to that original point of it's a frustrating process when you need to get a diagnostic and you can't. So yeah, no, I was playing rugby at the time, and got a kick in the balls and thought that that's what was wrong, and went around in quite a bit of pain for a long period of time. Went into the hospital, told me there was nothing wrong with me. Went on for months and months again after that, still going back in, and eventually got a scan. Long story short, then found out that I had a lump which was basically testicular cancer. But I was super lucky that it was still quite early. But that frustration, I think, was drilled into me from an early age. I just couldn't get over how stupid the whole process was. Like, it was literally down to a single person making a decision to give somebody a scan or not, and just not making that decision to give someone a scan. So you're totally out of control, and you're totally reliant on someone else making that decision for you, which I just think is madness. And that probably from a very early age helped me shape probably what formed the business. And then, there's no one single event, I would say, that brings people to kind of do what they do. It's and in this case, it's no different. I don't think it was that one event that drove me to think Let's Get Checked is a good business idea, or is something people need. It's a series of events that happen over the course of a lifetime where you see the same thing in repeat. And then I suppose the repetition adds up, and then you get your light bulb moment. Oh, maybe it's not a light bulb moment, but yeah, you get the idea.
Sure. So you've got the idea. It's appearing again and again in the stories you're hearing around you and what you're seeing. You're studying law and business at college. At what point did you decide to take the leap and start the company? Was this like always in the background that, a company was in your future, or did you just start it one day? What was that like?
I think when I would have finished my master's, I went and did a graduate program kind of in corporate banking and banking. Like, it's a 3-year program that take you through different aspects. And I think personally, even outside of the idea side of it, I just was never suited to going and sitting at a desk every day and working in that kind of office environment. It just never sat well with me. And coming in and working for somebody, and not being able to think creatively and then being able to apply it. So I remember after I finished that, I went to Canada for 6 months to do a ski season up in Banff, working on as a liftie. And that was very different. And then went traveling by myself through Central America for 6 months. So I essentially took a year out after doing my graduate program. And then off the back of that was like, look, I can't go back into another office job. I know I've wanted to do this for a very long time, and I knew what the core idea around Let's Get Checked was, and I just started from there. So it was after coming back from a bit of travel, I suppose.
Sure. And when you were coming back, you mentioned bootstrapping earlier. Was that your go-to angle? What were some of the early days like leading up to, your first sales, some of your first inflection points as a company? What were those?
In the early days, it's a pen and paper. You're jotting down a business specification document of how the process should work, and then you're figuring it out from there. You're borrowing money from everywhere, from family. We were hiring engineers to try and build out the original prototype. Got a bunch of developers in the UK. Got my first laboratory contract, and then it just kind of went from there. Our first market, would you believe, was the UK. And that allowed us, once we got a bit of traction of a sexual health driven service, to raise our first $1 million out of Switzerland. And from there, with that first $1 million, we just rebuilt the whole platform. Mike, our CTO, joined. Mike's a phenomenal engineer. And Roman, our COO, came on board, and we just said, look, this is a prototype. Let's rebuild it, and let's build it how we would want it to be into the future. So we built it with the idea of scaling it from the get-go, and with the idea of vertically integrating everywhere. So at the core of the idea is that there's this platform that links a patient on one side and a laboratory on the other, and this technology stack in the middle. But we said, look, to do this properly, we can't just be that core platform. We need to do the manufacturing. We need to provide the clinical services. We need to do the e-prescribing. We need to do the laboratory service. And we built out the whole platform and spec'd it out from the beginning with that particular mindset. So an inflection point, or a point where it was the real beginning, I think, was when we raised that first $1 million after establishing that the original platform worked, and then we rebuilt it from there.
Were you a solo founder at that point, or were Mike and Ronan kind of orbiting? What was that process like of team building?
Yeah, so it would have been the original prototype was just it was me by myself, and then both Mike and Ronan came in probably after that first 12 months, and then we drove that platform on a bit further, raised our capital, and then set out with this kind of with the rebuild. So yeah, I would still consider them both of those guys a part of the founding team.
Sure. So we're in the story now. It's around 2016 or so. You're in the UK, you're in Ireland. How do you start branching out from there and going global? Obviously, when it comes to the medical markets, there's regulation, there's, the FDA, if you want to get into America. How are you thinking about kind of jumping over some of those hurdles and turning this into the global business that it is today?
I think if we knew all the things that we had to do, we would never have done it. So I think it's a case of ignorance is bliss, and you're young and you're just hungry. So look, I think one of the things about being from Ireland is you're on an island and your market's so small, you have to look out from the get-go. You have to figure out which markets you want to go after if you want to grow, or if you have global aspirations. So we from the very first day said we wanted to do the US. And there was nothing sophisticated about it. We just traveled to the US, we pitched the idea, and we were over there the whole time, and probably spending money we didn't have. But we just through sheer will, we got some great contracts. We developed some brilliant lab partners. We got some absolutely phenomenal regulatory people involved. From the early day, the stars aligned, and we got some traction. And that allowed us to raise our Series A investment round in the US. That was led by Optum and Chi Ming Venture Partners. So that was kind of the starting point, I think.
Sure. And would you say that the Series A helped, obviously it proved the concept and gave you all, much greater source of capital. Did that feel inevitable? Did that feel like just the next step in the process? What was that like for you and the team?
Yeah, it was, I think, to do our first kind of large round in the United States after kind of the early success that we had. It's obviously an incredibly important moment. Like cash or funding is like lifeblood at that stage, and it always is. But I think to get backed by a group as sophisticated as Optum Ventures and also Chi Ming Venture Partners, like two kind of top tier like healthcare VCs, really gave us the stamp of approval, and was a really good signal to the market and a really critical point, I think, in the life cycle and journey of the company to get both of those groups in at such an early stage. And we're very lucky to have got them, and provided us a real platform. And both organizations, the board seats that they've occupied, we've just got phenomenal guidance and support along the way as we've gone through our B and our C.
How is that reliance on partnerships, or maybe reliance is the wrong word? How is that, trusting in your partners paid off for you in the business? And as a CEO, what's that process been like for you of learning when to take advice, when not to take advice? How have you thought about that?
I think we were very fortunate even after our Series B or A in our Series B, we took in money from Transformation Capital, in our C, Illumina Ventures, Deerfield, and each of these groups have just added such tremendous value. Like one of the things Ronan, our COO, say, look, it's free to talk, and to take advice, and I don't think you can ever take enough of it. But like our shareholders and our board and everyone who's been involved in the organization, we've been very fortunate that there's just been absolute alignment the whole way through. We've never had a difficult incident at a board level or someone that we were told was pulling in a different direction. And look, we're super lucky, but we've always kind of lent on those resources and taken advice when it's needed, and they've always been there to give advice. So you don't know everything yourself, and
sure,
it's just so important to have people that have not just been a VC but have been operational, actually run businesses and been successful at a business. And I think that's kind of a key thing that you always need to look at who you're taking money off. Like, is it just money, or is it money that's really going to help you scale, grow your business, mature your business, help you grow out your management team, and really add value. And I think that's definitely something that we've looked at as we've tried to raise capital, is how can these people add value to our organization, and will they help us scale it and take us to the next level? And in each case, we can safely say that they have.
Well, it's very exciting. The company is well capitalized. It's, you're entering this storm of COVID, which obviously has been, really important for the business and for healthcare and for telemedicine. So when COVID hit, tell us a little bit about that and how you adjusted your leadership team, the company, to really get behind the crisis and start supporting.
We didn't adjust our leadership team now per se, but it was definitely an adjustment in direction. From a lab side and from a product side, so product technology and lab as in testing. We had a very defined roadmap for the year. We knew exactly what we were going to do, and we knew month by month what features we were rolling out. And when COVID hit, that all just got put aside. We were in the fortunate position that we'd opened up our new lab facility, led by Sky, our CEO down there, and Michael and the guys, literally 2-3 months before everything hit. And we were focused on smaller blood sample sizes, looking at kind of routine chemistry tests using mass spec and a bunch of other ways of doing testing. And which obviously nobody expected this. But when it hit from the manufacturing side of the business, we had to change entirely everything we were manufacturing. We had to go and source swabs from all over the world and pull them in as quickly as possible. We were working around the clock for just months on end. And even on the lab side, we had to take equipment out. We had to bring new equipment in. We were trying to get reagents, so to run the instruments from our manufacturing providers. You'd have an order in, the reagent would disappear overnight. You'd be running to another manufacturer to get reagents. It was chaos. Trying to pull it all together and provide a service to the market, because suddenly there was certain resources that were finite, but the entire world needed those resources at once. And that's down from swabs to the particular reagents to the kit manufacturing. We were fortunate enough that because we own our own supply chain end to end, we had a lot of what we needed. But nobody was prepared for it. And it was definitely a case of scrambling quick to mobilize, to be able to really go out and help. Like I think being in the position that we were in, we just felt we had an obligation to help people and make sure that everyone got the testing they needed, and the testing that we had available, we were putting that capacity into groups where we could be most impactful. So, as we did operationalize it, and everyone across our organization just did a phenomenal job, like everyone just stepped up. We just couldn't give what we had to anybody. Like, we had to make hard decisions. And we've started by making our supplies and our testing capacity available for frontline healthcare workers, vulnerable populations, sick and elderly, people who were really at risk of COVID. I'd say you could write a book about it if you look back, but it's still ongoing. The world, or the time that we're in now, it is slightly different. I think resources aren't as scarce. The conversation has changed to not just at-risk groups, but how do we get the economy moving again, and how do we support that from a testing perspective? How do we get kids back to school? How do we get students back to universities? And the scope of the testing and the scope that we can provide and support is much, much bigger. But we can support that because resources aren't as finite. And I think the market's caught up a bit. But it was a pretty incredible time, and but just something that we're grateful that we could support, and we were at the front line of it as opposed to having to sit on the sideline.
And so, Peter, this is a bit of a leap, but it seems like this is, as a company, as a mission, something that has impacted everyone, just like you said at the beginning, where we each have seen the results of a late test or someone catching something that should have been caught earlier. Is this really what the culture focuses on? Like, do you find that, everyone that joins, or a high percentage of them, have been through this themselves? Is it something that, you all talk a lot about that motivates the teams? I'm just curious to know how you're going about culture building with something that is, creating a problem and a solution for something that we all struggle with. What's that like as a leader who has to build culture around that?
Like, just on the business side, it's hard, like when you go from like 100 staff to 370 people, when we've more, even when nobody can meet face to face. Everyone's working remotely, and trying to build a culture around that, like it's challenging, it's tough. It is something that we're always very focused on, and making sure that that everyone understands the reason that this company was created, and the good work that we can do. But it is a challenge, and it's a challenge for every company in the world. How do you maintain a culture when people aren't together? And the reality is that this is probably the new norm, and we just got to figure it out. There's all the obvious things that you do. You do your town halls, and you do your get-togethers, and you do your board updates, and all of it, which we're continuing to do. But and communicate the message that everyone who comes in understands why we created this company. But it is a challenge, like scaling this level to this extent in a pandemic where you can't look at each other. You can't be in the same room as one another. So, but look, it's part of the challenge, and it's definitely something that we're working on every day, like every other company in the world.
Completely. And so when it comes to challenges or dark nights of the soul, what are some of the biggest ones that you faced as a leader at the company? Are there any particular stories you like to tell?
Yeah, like I think I could probably tell a story about both of those. As a high growth company, when you're doing your Series A and your Series B, like you really run it to the wire. But I think you just have to be built that way, and you have to protect your staff and make sure that you continue to push forward, and it's all fine. But I think that's just part and parcel of high growth companies. As you scale through these rounds, and as you get into later rounds, things become more stable. Probably one of the most recent, though, I think probably around the regulatory piece, was us doing our home use approval, our EUA, with FDA for our COVID test. And it was just such a long, drawn-out process, but for the right reasons. Like, FDA have to be very meticulous around everything that we offer, and they looked at our entire supply chain and our manufacturing processes. But like, on one hand, you're like, people really need this test. Like, this is something that we have loads of supplies, loads of capacity for. There's literally people dying, but we have to go through this regulatory process before we can actually release it onto the market. And that was probably as frustrating a process as I've ever been in, but it was the right process. Like, that's the way it has to be. But I think when you'd look at the news and you'd read the stories and you'd hear of all the terrible things happening, you've got the capability of getting more tests out there, but you can't. And you're waiting for an approval to land. It was a pretty painful process, but we had an amazing team that we just worked night and day, round the clock, so little sleep, to get that done, and we got it out. And when we got it out, it was a great success. We were able to provide these tests that everyone needs. But a very frustrating process, but hugely rewarding at the end as well. And totally understanding the need for these guardrails and the meticulous approach that FDA take to these things. But it was a hard time.
Sure. Peter, I'm really curious about how you can talk and kind of share some of the successes that you're having as a company when it comes to such sensitive topics, right? So, customers are obviously trusting you with privacy and with security, but at the same time, you as a company and your teams are helping them with, major healthcare challenges. So how do you go about sharing some of the stories of what you're accomplishing as a company without, making customers feel uncomfortable about, details being shared? Is it just as simple as anonymizing stories? Are you able to talk about, what you're achieving based on all the tests? Is there any data you can share at all? How do you walk that fine line?
Yeah, we invite our customers to speak to things. Like, some people just want to be entirely anonymous in the process, and you absolutely have to respect that. Of course, like, our job isn't to tell the world about all the great things we're doing. Our job is to help people. That's mission critical. Us communicating the great stuff that we're doing is secondary. If our customers come to us and they feel that the impact that we've had and the support that we've given, that they want to speak to it, we'll let them speak to it, and we'll support that and help them amplify it. But we typically don't probe our customers for stories. We let them come to us. It's not something that we would actively do. I suppose internally and externally, we communicate our success by, at the moment, it's very easy around COVID. Last month in July, we did, I think, close to 300,000 tests alone. And that's
Wow.
continuing to grow. Each and every one of those tests matters, and there's an amazing outcome off the back of it. And it's really just, we all feel good, and it's incredible for everyone in the company to focus on that and see the impact we're having, even on a numbers basis. So, but I suppose back to your point, the most important thing is that we're super respectful of our customers and protect their privacy, and we would never poke them to want to speak further. It's totally on them to do so.
Sure. So do any of your, I'd imagine that a lot of your personal interests kind of align with the healthcare space, and that when you get time off, you're kind of reading some about it, thinking about the future there. Are there any things when it comes to the future of health and medicine that you're particularly excited about, whether it's, extending health spans, longevity research, anti-aging? What type of things are you researching when you get some downtime?
The most important part of that is the downtime part. I've 3 kids under 3. So when I'm not here...
Oh, same here. That's a big challenge.
It's chaos. So, yeah. I don't know, I think some of the work that you see coming out of Grail and these guys, particularly around some of the cancer diagnostics, I find particularly interesting. I think longevity is a big buzzword. With many things can drive longevity, but I do find it particularly interesting, the work that these companies are doing. Grail, so aptly named, but that would probably be the place that I would focus my time and attention the most, because it can be the most impactful and take a hell of a lot of cost out of the healthcare system. The amount of cost, that the impact on life that it can have, but the unnecessary healthcare expenditure that goes towards treating people for these late stages, and they shouldn't be there in the first place.
Yes. Yeah. The amount of time that we could collectively give back people impacted by cancer is, astonishing. If you think about if Grail achieves its mission, which they're doing at a rapid pace. It's very exciting to say the least.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you're a father, 3 children under 3. I'm right there with you. I have 3 sons that are under 3. One's 2.5. The others are twins. They're 6 months. So Peter, help me out. What's the secret?
There is no secret. Great wife. Yeah. So no, I didn't get hit with twins. So.
So when it comes to that, family life and balancing everything, how are you integrating things? How are you thinking about keeping everything on the up and up?
The last 6 months, it's definitely difficult. I turned around probably 3 months into COVID breaking and realized another newborn. So it was
Sure.
It's difficult, but you just got to find the time. I think we're stabilizing as a business now, and things are becoming it's more in our stride to be doing these huge volumes and at scale, and we just had to adapt processes, and it just required a huge amount of time and attention. But I think ultimately I have an amazing wife who would totally understands the vision of the business, and to have a partner that supports that is pretty critical if you're operating this way. And I think everyone knows you just got to find the time as well. So I think we're getting better at that.
Sure. When it comes to the future of the company, what's your vision? Is there anything you can share in terms of, is LetsGetChecked a publicly traded company soon? Hopefully, is that the route you're going, or is there another route you're thinking about?
I think ultimately, to do an IPO, a lot of things have to align, and ultimately it might not be the right thing for the company. It's there's a lot of variables between here and there, and staying private might actually just be the right thing. But I think what we do have control of is what we want the business to evolve into. And there's just so much stuff that we're developing, and we're going to be releasing soon around, not just a diagnostics platform, but a whole encompassing consumer health platform, leveraging more of our telehealth offering and our e-prescribing, and more sophisticated around the diagnostics, and using genetics as a companion with a routine diagnostic. And there's just so much that we can do, so much ahead of us. And it's just really exciting to be at this stage of the business, where we can really move on and be even more impactful for our customer base.
Right. Well, Peter, thank you for being generous with your time. This is exciting stuff. It's a critical mission for the future, for everyone that's listening. Is there a final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with, whether it's a thought challenge or a call to action? What's your final thought here?
I'm terrible at those questions, so I don't have a final thought. But thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the conversation today. So thank you.
Fantastic. Peter, thanks for joining us. And to everyone listening, we'll see you next time.
I'm Sophia Bush, and you've been listening to Hidden in Plain Sight from Mission.org. This podcast is sponsored by our friends at Splunk, the Data to Everything platform. In today's data-driven world, every company, big or small, new or old, is sitting on terabytes of unused, untapped, and unknown data. Splunk helps turn all that data into action. Using cutting-edge AI and machine learning, Splunk delivers real-time predictive insights that will help you on your mission to change the world. With solutions for IT, security, Internet of Things, and business operations, Splunk empowers people to make faster, better decisions and take action to get things done. It's time for our data to be more than a record of what happened. It's time to make things happen.